above the average. There is a most pleasing frankness about him as to making any further explanation than I have done. But, good Lord, what's that?" The door of the office had been dashed loudly open, and its still trembling frame was filled by a tall, very angry young man in automobile costume, whose highly coloured, aristocratic-looking features Trot recognized immediately from the print in the page of the Illustrated London News. "Ah, Mr. Carl here too, the village busybody!" The newcomer sneered with a slight accent which showed his English education. "You are insufferably mixing yourself in my affairs," he continued, as Carl with an effort controlled himself and made no answer. "Keep out of them. That is my advice. Take it. Does a woman have to order you off the premises before you can understand that you are not wanted? As for you," he swung toward Trot, "you are Trot, I suppose?" "Yes, that is my name, Mr. Axton," replied the psychologist, leaning against his desk. The other advanced a step and raised a threatening finger. "Then that advice is meant for you, too. I want no police, no detectives, no outsider of any sort interfering in this matter. Make no mistake, it will be the worst for anyone who pushes himself in. I came here at once to take the case out of your hands. As soon as I found Miss Waldron had come here. This is strictly my affair. Keep out of it." "You mean, Mr. Axton, that you prefer to investigate it personally?" the psychologist inquired. "Exactly. Investigate and punish." "But you cannot blame Miss Waldron for feeling great anxiety even on your account, as your personal risk in making such an investigation will be so immensely greater than anyone else's would be." "My risk? Certainly you may be simply playing into the hand of your strange visitor by pursuing him to aid any other's risk. Mine, for instance, if I were to take up the matter, would be comparatively slight, beginning perhaps by questioning the night watchman and stable boys in the neighborhood, with a view to learning what became of the man after he left the house, and besides, such risks are a part of my business." Axton halted. "I had not thought of it in that light," he said reflectively. "You are too courageous, foolishly courageous, Mr. Axton. Do you mind if I sit down? Thank you. You think, Mr. Trot, that an investigation such as you suggest would satisfy Miss Waldron, make her easier in her mind, I mean?" "I think so, certainly." "And it would not necessarily entail calling in the police. You must appreciate how I shrink from publicity. Another story concerning the Axton family exploited in the daily papers. I had no intention of consulting the police, or of calling them in, at least until I was ready to make the arrest." "I must confess, Mr. Trot," said Axton easily, "that I found you a very different man from what I had expected. I imagined an uneducated, somewhat brutal, perhaps talkative fellow, but I find you, if I may say so, a gentleman. Yes, I am tempted to let you continue your investigation on the lines you have suggested. I shall ask your help. I will help you as much as in my power." "Then let me begin, Mr. Axton, with a question. Pardon me if I open a window, for the room is rather warm. I want to know whether you can supplement these letters, which so far are the only real evidence against the man, by any further description of him." And Trot, who had thrown open the window beside him, undisturbed by the roar that filled the office from the traffic-laden street below, took the letters from his pocket and opened them one by one, clumsily, upon the desk. "I am afraid I cannot add anything to them, Mr. Trent. We must get on then with what we have here." The psychologist hitched his chair near to the window to get a better light on the paper in his hand, and his cuff knocked one of the other letters off the desk onto the window sill. He turned hastily but clumsily, and touched but could not grasp it before it slipped from the sill out into the air. He sprang to his feet with an exclamation of dismay, and dashed from the room. Axton and Carl, rushing to the window, watched the paper, driven by a strong breeze, flutter down the street until lost to sight among wagons, and a minute later saw Trot appear below them, bareheaded and excited, darting in and out among vehicles at the spot where the paper had disappeared. but it had been carried away upon some muddly wagon wheel, or reduced to tatters, for he returned after 15 minutes' search, disheartened, vexed, and empty-handed. "It was the letter describing the second visit," he exclaimed disgustedly as he opened the door. "It was most essential, for it contained the most minute description of the man of all. I do not see how I can manage well now without it." "Why should you?" Karl said in surprise at the evident stupidity of the psychologist. "Surely, Mr. Axton, if he cannot add any other details, can at least repeat those he had already given." "Of course," Trot recollected. "If you would be so good, Mr. Axton, I will have a stenographer take down the statement to give you the least trouble." "I will gladly do that," Axton agreed, and when the psychologist had summoned the stenographer, he dictated without hesitation the following letter: "The second time I saw the man was at Calcutta, in the Great Eastern Hotel. He was the same man I had seen at Cairo, shoeless and turbaned. At least, I believed then that it was a turban, but I saw later at Cape Town that it was his short brown coat wrapped around his head, and tied by the sleeves under his chin. We had at the Great Eastern two whitewashed communicating rooms opening off a narrow dirty corridor, along whose whitewashed walls, at a height of some 2 feet from the floor, ran a greasy smudge, gathered from the heads and shoulders of the dark-skinned, white-robed native servants who spent the night sleeping or sitting in front of their masters' doors. Though Lawler and I each had a servant also outside his door, I dragged a trunk against mine after closing it, a useless precaution, as it proved, as Lawler put no trunk against his, and though I see now that I must have been moved by some foresight of danger, I went to sleep afterward quite peacefully. I awakened somewhat later in a cold and shuddering fright, oppressed by the sense of some presence in my room. Startled up in bed, and looked about. My trunk was still against the door, as I had left it, and besides this, I saw at first only the furniture of the room, which stood as when I had gone to sleep: two rather heavy and much scratched mahogany English chairs, a mahogany dresser with swinging mirror, and the spindle-legged four-post canopy bed on which I lay. But presently I saw more. He was there. A dark shadow against the whitewashed wall beside the flat-topped window marked his position. As he crouched beside my writing desk and held the papers in a bar of white moonlight to look at them, for an instant the sight held me motionless. And suddenly, becoming aware that he was seen, he leaped to his feet, a short, broad-shouldered, bulky man, sped across the blue and white straw matting into Lawler's room, and drove the door to behind him. I followed, forcing the door open with my shoulder. Saw Lawler just leaping out of bed in his pajamas, and tore open Lawler's corridor door through which the man had vanished. He was not in the corridor, though I inspected it carefully, and Lawler, though he had been awakened by the man's passage, had not seen him. Lawler's servant, pretty well dazed with sleep, told me in blank and open-mouthed amazement at my question that he had not seen him pass, and the other white-draped Hindus gathering about me from the doors in front of which they had been asleep made the same statement. None of these Hindus resembled in the least the man I had seen, for I looked them over carefully one by one with this in mind. When I made a light in my room in order to examine it thoroughly, I found nothing had been touched except the writing desk, and even from that nothing had been taken. Although the papers had been disturbed, the whole affair was as mysterious and inexplicable as the man's first appearance had been, or his subsequent appearance. For though I carefully questioned the hotel employees in the morning, I could not learn that any such man had entered or gone out from the hotel. "That is very satisfactory indeed." Trent's gratification was evident in his tone as Axton finished. "It will quite take the place of the letter that was lost. There is only one thing more, so far as I know now, in which you may be of present help to me, Mr. Axton. Besides your friend Lawler, who was drowned in the wreck of the Gladstone, and the man Beasley, who Miss Waldron tells me is in a London hospital, there were only two men in Cape Town with you who had been in Cairo and Calcutta at the same time you were. You do not happen to know what has become of that